She named her daughter Bella, but her mother-in-law said, "This is Owen." Then came fake ultrasounds, and a war to erase the child's identity began. Snow was falling gently across that quiet suburb of Long Island, the kind of silence where every flake seemed to make a sound of its own. It should have felt magical. The small church, the backyard ceremony. It looked like something out of a movie. Except the bride didn't have that soft, glowing smile. Her face held something else. A strange, growing anxiety. Elena, the woman with more questions than hope in her eyes. It was her wedding day. She was marrying Adrian, a calm, thoughtful, slightly stiff middle school teacher. Everything seemed fine, until another bride walked through the church's main doors. Margaret, Adrian's mother. She was wearing a long white gown, soft heels, a short netted veil, and a pearl necklace. At first, no one quite understood what was happening. Some guests whispered, "Maybe she's a bridesmaid." But when Margaret started walking down the aisle, before Elena, and the camera panned to her like she was the star, a heavy, awkward silence fell over the entire church. Elena's face went pale. Her father leaned in and whispered, "She looks like she's walking in her own wedding." Elena just smiled faintly, but her grip on Adrian's arm tightened. Margaret came up to her and hugged her. "My sweet daughter, you finally get to be one of us." But it wasn't warmth. It was ownership. The ceremony went on. Vows were exchanged, rings, kisses, applause. And then Margaret gave the first toast at the reception, about herself. "Here's to the mother who raised such a wonderful man, and to all the sacrifices I made so that he could marry someone like Elena." Elena smiled, but in her head, one thought stuck. That wasn't a toast. That was a territorial claim. After the wedding, Elena and Adrian moved into the same house where Margaret lived, in a basement suite that had its own entrance but was still part of the home. Margaret established a routine. Every morning at 6 a.m., she'd open the fridge, inspect Elena's loaf of bread, and comment, "This isn't whole grain. Adrian prefers fiber." Or, "Almond milk? Honey, he's lactose intolerant, not trendy." At first, Elena brushed it off as concern, but slowly she started noticing a pattern. Margaret wasn't offering advice. She was exerting veto power over everything. She'd call Adrian. "She's feeding you from a can, honey." And then Adrian would walk over saying, "She's just worried. She means well." One time, Margaret canceled a college reunion Elena had planned in their backyard. "Adrian's allergic to cats," she said, "and that girl with the tabby cat, she might have dander on her coat." The party was outside, and Adrian had never had any allergies. Then came the gender reveal. Elena was 5 months pregnant. She had planned something sweet, blue and pink cupcakes with colored fillings to reveal the baby's gender. Margaret insisted she knew an ultrasound tech, an old friend, and could help plan a better reveal. 2 days before the party, Margaret called everyone. "It's a boy! We're finally getting an Owen in the family." Elena had no idea this had happened. The party became pointless. Guests stopped bringing balloons. Margaret handled all the decorations, blue, of course. She even put up a board. "Welcome, baby Owen." Elena asked Adrian, why would she tell everyone? He shrugged. She was just excited. But that night, Elena couldn't sleep. She looked at herself in the mirror, and for the first time she realized this wasn't just controlling behavior. Margaret believed the baby was hers, and nothing should happen without her permission. A few weeks later, Adrian's brother Marcus hosted a BBQ. In front of everyone, Margaret raised a glass and said, "Marcus, maybe you'll be next, if you can find someone as fertile and patient as Elena, though she does get a bit emotional sometimes." Marcus laughed awkwardly, then leaned in toward Elena and whispered, "Don't take it personally. Mom's always been like that." Elena said nothing, but later that night, Alone in the bathroom, something happened. Her ultrasound photo slipped from her hand. She picked it up and zoomed in. The technician's name was different. It wasn't from her doctor. And then it hit her. Margaret had forged a duplicate ultrasound. After that, Elena slowly started shutting herself down. Every decision had to pass through Margaret's filter. Clothes, food, the nursery colors. She'd chosen neutral tones: beige, gray, soft yellow. Margaret looked around and scoffed. Gray? For a boy? Are we raising a liberal snowflake? Every conversation had become a psychological chess match. At family gatherings, Margaret's tone grew more acidic. She'd call Elena fragile, too hormonal, and sometimes even too modern to be maternal. Elena began seeing a therapist, Dr. Patterson, who also worked with a local women's shelter. In their first session, he said, "This isn't just mother-in-law drama, Elena. This is a battle for identity and control, and you're being erased." Elena stayed quiet. Then she asked, "Am I being paranoid?" Dr. Patterson replied, "Paranoia is fear without evidence, but you're living under surveillance disguised as care." Elena's life started to revolve around the blue room. Before the baby was even born, Margaret insisted the nursery had to be entirely boy-themed. Navy blue walls, rocket ship decals, and a wooden nameplate that read Owen's Room that she'd custom ordered from Etsy. Elena pushed back, suggesting a gender-neutral setup might be better. But Margaret scoffed. "This is America. Boys should have bold colors. Girls get pink. That's how it works." Elena responded quietly. "But what if it's not a boy?" Margaret burst into laughter. "Of course it's a boy. I had a dream, Elena. I saw Adrian holding him. Don't question a mother's intuition." At this point, Margaret's ideas weren't just delusions. They had become directions. She attended every doctor's appointment, took notes, and eyed any female staff member who got too friendly with Elena. Once, she told the receptionist, "Don't get too close, honey. She gets emotional." Hormones. When Dr. Bennett performed the 30-week ultrasound, the report clearly stated, "Gender not visible. Baby's position non-cooperative." Elena didn't share that report with Margaret. She knew it would only be twisted into something else. But Margaret went ahead and had her own report forged. Then came the day of delivery, on a stormy, rain-lashed night. Elena was in labor for 14 hours. Adrian stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand. Meanwhile, Margaret sat in the waiting room, updating Facebook. "Baby Owen is almost here. Thank you for your prayers." At 7:36 a.m., Bella was born. Elena held her daughter against her chest for the first time and whispered the name, Bella. When Margaret reached the delivery room doors, Adrian showed her the baby's picture. Margaret's face turned to stone. She asked, "Where's Owen?" Adrian replied gently, "It's a girl, Mom." For a long moment, Margaret said nothing. Then she turned toward the nurse and snapped, "Check again." The nurse let out a short laugh, then caught herself after seeing Margaret's face. "Ma'am, it's a healthy baby girl." Margaret turned around and told two women in the waiting room. "False scan. I told them it was a boy. These machines make mistakes." But she didn't treat it like a mistake. She treated it like betrayal. Once Elena was moved to the recovery room, Margaret didn't offer congratulations. Instead, she said, "I guess you were too vegetarian to make a real man." Elena thought she'd misheard, until Margaret repeated it, louder, in front of others. Over the next few days, Margaret's behavior spiraled. She refused to hold Bella, wouldn't say her name. She referred to her as the child, or this one. Then one afternoon, Elna walked into the nursery and froze. Margaret had rehung the Owen nameplate on the wall. Elna turned to Adrian. "This has to stop. She's not just being overbearing. She's denying reality. Adrian defended her. It's just disappointment. She'll come around. Elena stared at him. This isn't disappointment. This is rewriting truth. By the 4th week, it was time for Bella's first pediatric visit. Margaret insisted on coming along. The clinic visit went fine, until the doctor finished his exam and smiled. Everything looks great, hitting all the developmental milestones. Margaret leaned in and said quietly, I think her shoulders are too broad. Maybe check for chromosomal issues. Elena froze. The doctor gave Margaret a firm look. There is absolutely no concern. Margaret doubled down. I'm just saying, you never know these days. Parents push their kids into things. I've read about these social gender transitions. Happens more than people admit. That evening, Elena came home and broke down. Enough, she told Adrian. She's planting doubts. In others, in you, in me. Adrian sat in silence for a long time, then finally said, maybe she's just scared of being replaced. Elena's voice was calm but sharp. Then why is she trying to erase my daughter? Margaret's obsession wasn't passive anymore. It was active warfare. She began quietly seeding doubt about Elena's mental state in their church's women's circle. She's been going through postpartum, Margaret would whisper gently. And with all this modern gender stuff, I'm just worried she might confuse the baby. A few days later, Elena noticed other moms at the playground started avoiding her. Some stared too long. Others turned away too quickly. When she finally asked her friend Sarah what was going on, Sarah hesitated, then admitted, Margaret said you were experimenting with non-binary parenting? Elena understood. Margaret had launched a campaign. One morning, the pediatric clinic called. An anonymous report had been filed. The mother is using non-consensual methods to influence the child's gender, identity. The clinic was legally required to record the report and notify Child Protective Services. Elena collapsed. It wasn't metaphorical. She hit the floor. That same day, she made the decision to confront Margaret directly. She walked into the basement, face to face. Elena, Margaret said calmly, I'm just protecting my grandchild. From who? Elena asked. Margaret's eyes didn't blink. From you. Margaret's delusion was no longer an argument. It had become a weapon, sharp, targeted, and designed to strip Elena of her motherhood. The Blue Room wasn't a nursery anymore. It was a battlefield. And the first wound was inflicted the day Margaret said, This baby was never supposed to be a girl. Elena finally understood. Margaret wasn't living in denial. She was constructing an illusion. And that illusion was starting to spread far beyond the walls of that room. That morning, nothing felt unusual. Bella was sitting on her playmat, chewing on a plastic toy key. A soft shaft of sunlight filtered through the window, and in the kitchen, Elena was making coffee, for only the 3rd time that week that she'd felt something close to normal. Then came 3 knocks at the door. Not loud, but deliberate, like someone asserting presence without raising their voice. Elena opened the door. 2 people stood on the porch. A woman in her 40s wearing a navy jacket that read New York State Child Protective Services, and a man beside her typing notes into a tablet. The woman introduced herself calmly. I'm Valerie Harris, CPS investigator. We received a report stating that your daughter may be subject to psychological abuse related to gender identity. We're here to conduct a welfare check. Elena almost dropped her coffee mug. Excuse me? Her voice wasn't panicked. It was disbelief. Valerie replied with professional neutrality. We understand this is upsetting, but we're required by law to assess the home environment, speak with the parent, and check on the child's well-being. Those 3 words echoed in Elena's ears. Psychological abuse. Bella was still sitting quietly, unaware, chewing her toy. Elena scooped her up. She didn't deny entry. She knew if she refused, it would escalate. The CPS agents began inspecting the home, fridge, pantry, even the bathroom. Valerie examined the toys and then walked toward the nursery, the blue room. The nameplate was still on the wall. Owen's room. Valerie turned. "Why does it say Owen?" Elena answered calmly. "That's what my mother-in-law wanted to call the baby. We had a disagreement." Valerie made a note. Family discord regarding child identity. Conflicting nursery labeling. Elena wanted to rip the nameplate off the wall, off the drywall, off her skin, but she stayed silent. Then came another question. "Are you currently attempting any form of gender-neutral or non-conforming parenting?" Elena's face stiffened. "Excuse me?" Valerie read from the report. "It was stated that you may be raising your daughter as gender-neutral or have expressed intent to support a future gender transition." Elena took a deep breath. "I've never said or done anything like that. She's a baby. She doesn't even talk yet." "Who told you this?" Valerie didn't answer, but Elena already knew. Margaret. Valerie closed her file. "We'll submit a preliminary report and notify you if we need to follow up. In the meantime, please ensure there are no conflicting identity cues around the child, such as incorrect name labeling or terminology." Elena looked at the nursery wall again, and for a moment, she felt like she was that wall, painted with someone else's name. Valerie and her colleague left, but Elena remained frozen in place, holding Bella against her chest. Then her knees slowly sank to the floor. She held her daughter tighter, eyes shut, breathing through the pain. Margaret had just used a new weapon: state machinery. When Adrian got home, Elena looked at him with hollow eyes, then told him everything. He blinked in disbelief, then mumbled, "Maybe they misunderstood. Maybe Mom just tried to help." Elena's face hardened. "No, Adrian, she didn't try to help. She tried to take my motherhood away." That night, Elena didn't sleep. She checked every door latch, twice, pulled on every window bar. Then she brought Bella to bed beside her and laid herself down on the floor near the door, like a soldier on night watch. The next morning, she called Dr. Patterson. "CPS came to my house," she said. He didn't hesitate. "Did they mention gender identity?" "Exactly that." He said, "This is a pattern. Margaret is escalating. You need to prepare for a sustained psychological war." Elena asked, "What do I do?" He said, "Document. Every visit, every phone call, every strange letter. This isn't family drama anymore. This is reputational warfare." The very next week, Elena received a call from Bella's daycare. "We got an anonymous tip that you may be promoting unsafe gender ideologies around your daughter." Elena rushed there in person. Margaret was already sitting in the office. When Elena entered, Margaret looked up and said with a smile, "You always overreact." Elena looked her straight in the eye for the first time with no fear. "Stay away from my daughter," she said, calm and cold. Margaret smiled wider. "She's my granddaughter. You don't get to erase that." That evening, Elena created a new folder in her phone. Evidence. CPS. She saved the voicemail where Margaret had said, "You can't stop the truth, Elena." Then she went to the nursery, took the Owen nameplate off the wall, threw it away, held her baby girl close, whispered against her hair, "Your name is Bella, and no one gets to rewrite that." Margaret had struck with the language of the law behind the curtain of concern. But Elena understood now. The next battle would be in court, and she wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a warrior. Elena and Adrian finally made the decision they should have made long ago: to leave. They moved out of the house with the basement suite where Margaret's presence echoed in every wall, every floorboard. Elena often felt like even the walls were on Margaret's side, whispering back at her whenever she tried to make a decision of her own, shutting her down with invisible pressure. They rented a small apartment an hour away, in a different zip code. Adrian transferred districts and started teaching at a new school. Elena chose a private daycare for Bella, one with strict security policies and a no-exception parental permissions rule. The first few weeks felt like relief. No knocks from CPS, no dagger stares from strangers at the playground. Margaret's calls were now blocked by Adrian himself, but the silence didn't feel thick enough. Elena knew it was temporary. 3 weeks later, one morning, she found a small brown package at the door. No return address. Inside was a blue fleece blanket, embroidered in the corner, "For my grandson, with love." Grandma Elena's hands started shaking. She took a photo of the package, sealed it in a Ziploc bag, and saved the image in her evidence folder. Adrian asked, "How did she find us?" Elena answered, flat and hollow, "She never lost us." From that day on, Elena added a new ritual to her routine, checking her rearview mirror, at every light, every corner. One day, on the way to the grocery store, she noticed a black sedan tailing her. She switched lanes 3 times. When it finally turned off, her heart was pounding in her throat. She knew Margaret wouldn't come herself, but Margaret's presence was no longer a person. It was a shadow. A week later, Elena went to pick up Bella from daycare. The receptionist said, "An older woman came by earlier today, said she was Bella's grandmother, but she wasn't on the pickup list, so we turned her away. She didn't argue, just left a note." The note was written on a pale pink card. "Owen deserves better than confusion. You'll see soon." Grandma Elena stopped breathing. She remembered, last week, the temporary secretary had made a typo on the daycare form, entered Bella's name as Owen. The correction still hadn't been updated in the system. Margaret had found the crack and crawled through it. Elena wasn't being paranoid. She was being practical. She contacted a local security firm, installed a discreet camera outside their apartment, upgraded to a smart lock on the front door, placed a GPS tracker in her car. She also filed a preliminary stalking complaint with the local police. The police response was procedural. "Unless there's a direct threat or property breach, we can't intervene." Elena responded calmly, "When the threat walks through my door, it'll be too late." One evening at the grocery store, Elena was browsing the organic section when her eyes landed on a woman beside her. Margaret. No panic, no hiding. She stood there like she belonged. She picked up a stalk of celery and said, without even turning, "You still feeding her that fake vegan crap? Kids need meat." Elena couldn't respond. She just froze. Margaret turned slightly, pushed her cart forward and walked away. Elena didn't move. People passed by her in the aisle, but all she could hear was Margaret's voice. Margaret wasn't stalking her anymore. She had merged into her life. That night, Elena told Adrian everything. For the first time, Adrian's tone turned cold. "We're going to court, restraining order." Elena shook her head. "She won't stop. Orders don't scare her." She looked him dead in the eyes. "Only exposure does." Elena started digging. She searched through Margaret's old Facebook posts, found a private group titled, "Save Owen from Gender Confusion." There were 13 members, all fake accounts, some from Margaret's past church circles. Elena screenshot every post, every profile, saved them all in her evidence folder. A few days later, she saw the black sedan again, this time parked right across from their building. She checked her camera footage. The zoom was blurry, but in the driver's ear, a pair of pearl earrings, Margaret's signature style. From that moment on, Elena began tracking everything: dates, times, who showed up at daycare, who she saw at the grocery store, which cars lingered too long outside their complex. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a guardian. Margaret wasn't just showing up. She was laying claim. The name Owen had become more than a name. It was an ideology. Elena looked at Bella sleeping in her crib. Peaceful, a hint of a smile on her face. And she made herself a promise. No one renames my daughter. No one rewrites her story. That same night, she took her laptop and typed an email. Subject line: urgent consultation. Systemic harassment via misgendering and identity manipulation. She was reaching out to a civil rights attorney. Elena wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was preparing to drag Margaret's shadow into the light. As Elena climbed the courthouse steps, she realized something. She was no longer the woman who had once tried to call Margaret Mom. That girl was gone. There was no hope left in her heart that Margaret would ever change. All Elena had now were two things: Bella and the truth. The restraining order hearing didn't take long. Elena submitted everything: surveillance footage, daycare notes, grocery store sightings, even the threatening cards mailed without a return address. All carefully printed, labeled, organized. Margaret didn't show up. Her attorney simply said, "She's unwell and being misrepresented." But the judge took Elena seriously. A full-year restraining order was granted. Margaret was to remain at least 500 feet away from both Elena's home and Bella's daycare. But Elena knew. Margaret wasn't afraid of paper. She didn't draw power from words. She drew it from reactions. A week later, Elena found another envelope, this time addressed to Bella's daycare. Inside was a single printed page. "Your daycare supports child abuse. You are part of the confusion. God is watching." No return address, but the font, Comic Sans purple ink, the same Margaret used in her scrapbooks. Elena filed another report with the police, but this time she looked the officer in the eye. "You're not dealing with a stalker. You're dealing with someone who believes she's on a mission." Margaret's next weapon was the internet. One afternoon, Elena stumbled onto a Facebook group. Save Owen. It had grown. Over 200 members now. Inside the group were photos of Elena, blurred pictures of Bella, and baseless accusations. Woke parenting. Destroying childhood identity. Forcing boys into dresses. Elena reported it, alerted friends. But some posts had already gone viral, and the harassment began. One day, her workplace HR department called her in. "We received an anonymous email accusing you of being part of a cult that manipulates children's gender identity." Elena asked, "Was there any proof?" The HR rep shook her head. "Number." But the emails being circulated. Elena understood. Margaret wasn't fighting face-to-face anymore. She was fighting indirect. One day, while picking up Bella from daycare, a woman, maybe 30, beige overcoat, stood in Elena's path. She looked Elena in the eye and said, "You don't know what you're doing. Let the boy be who he is." Elena froze. "Do I know you?" she asked. The woman didn't respond. She walked away. But Elena noted her license plate, snapped a photo, requested footage from the daycare. Within 3 hours, she had it. The woman had exited Margaret's old car. Elena wasn't preparing for court anymore. She was preparing for a full investigation. She hired a cybercrime attorney, launched a digital forensic scan of the entire group. What surfaced was even darker. Margaret had created multiple fake accounts. She had launched a misinformation campaign, targeting Elena. She'd even started a GoFundMe page. Help save Owen from medical abuse. It had already raised $2,000. Elena reported the campaign. But by the time GoFundMe responded, the funds had been withdrawn, sent to someone named Amber Lee. Elena Googled the name. Amber Lee was a former social worker. Her license had been suspended. Elena tracked Amber's past addresses. One of them was just blocks from Margaret's property. Margaret wasn't showing up anymore. She was activating proxies. The following week, it escalated. Amber showed up at Bella's daycare with a forged authorization letter to pick her up. The signature was a poorly faked version of Adrian's. The daycare refused, called Elena immediately. By the time she arrived, Amber was gone. But the security footage caught everything. Elena filed a police complaint. Attempted unauthorized pickup of a minor. She handed over the footage, the forged letter, and the compiled evidence of Margaret's history. She told the prosecutor, "This isn't family tension. This is premeditated psychological kidnapping." That night, even Adrian finally admitted it. "I protected her for too long," he said. "I thought she was just old and confused." Elena looked at him, calm but sharp. "It's not confusion, Adrian. It's conviction. She thinks she's the hero of this story." Margaret's legal team responded with a new tactic. Elena is alienating the child from her paternal family. The grandmother is only seeking connection. Elena's attorney didn't blink. He submitted the compiled folder, surveillance logs, forged signatures, harassment threads, group screenshots, and attempted pickup footage. The judge took a long pause, then said, "We're no longer dealing with familial disagreement. This is weaponized emotional manipulation, under the disguise of maternal concern, and it is no longer protected under civil leniency." Margaret was ordered to appear in court for an in-person hearing the following month. Elena was tired, but she wasn't bowed. Margaret's greatest illusion was thinking the world could be manipulated like a chessboard. Elena's greatest weapon was the fire that burns behind a mother's silence. Amber Lee's attempt to breach Bella's daycare didn't just feel like a violation. It gave Margaret's shadow a physical form. For Elena, this was no longer about suspicion or strange behavior. This was a coordinated conspiracy, and Margaret was orchestrating it. Elena pulled Amber's photo from the surveillance footage and personally delivered it to the police. The officer recognized her immediately. "That's Amber Lee. Her license was suspended 3 years ago for falsifying child welfare reports." Elena's stomach dropped. Margaret was now hiring former professionals, ones ousted from the system, but still dangerously connected and experienced. The next morning, Elena sent a photo of Amber's business card to her attorney. On the back, it read, "Still saving children, one truth at a time. AL." And below it, a phone number that matched Margaret's old landline. Elena hired a private investigator, a retired federal agent who, after one meeting, said bluntly, "This isn't a family feud. You're under siege." The PI began monitoring Margaret's phone records, property rentals, and social connections. Within 2 weeks, he produced a detailed report. Margaret had paid Amber Lee $1,200 under the label consultation. Amber had received written pickup instructions for Bella. And most disturbing, Margaret had violated her restraining order by accessing the daycare's parking lot, technically outside the building, but still legally restricted. Then the PI delivered something that left Elena numb. Margaret had attempted to file alternative documents in Bella's name through a private birth record service. The name? Owen Michael. It was an unfiled request, intended to update the baby's gender. Elena saw it clearly now. This wasn't delusion. It was identity theft wrapped in maternal fantasy. Margaret wasn't ignoring reality. She was replacing it. She wasn't stealing Bella. She was rewriting her. Elena compiled every piece of evidence. 1. Grocery store footage of Margaret 2. Amber Lee's daycare infiltration footage 3. Forged pickup authorization letter 4. Metadata and IP trail from the Save Owen Facebook group 5. GoFundMe transaction and routing logs 6. Payment receipt linking Margaret and Amber 7. Attempted false document filing in Bella's name. She met with the district attorney. "I don't need containment," she said. "I need a criminal case." The DA nodded. "We're close. One more clear violation, and we move." Margaret delivered that violation herself. One evening, Elena found Bella's bedtime storybook, usually kept in the nursery, sitting on the front porch railing. Inside, on the first page, a handwritten message. For my Owen. May you always remember who you really are. Elena checked the surveillance camera. Margaret hadn't come herself, but a 15-year-old girl, one of Margaret's church youth volunteers, had exited a car at 9:30 p.m., placed the book, and ran. Elena time-stamped the footage and sent it directly to the DA. 3 days later, the arrest warrant was issued. Margaret Radcliffe, age 68, was taken into custody under charges of witness tampering, restraining order violation, conspiracy to endanger a child, attempted identity interference. When officers arrived at her home, Margaret was knitting. At the moment of arrest, all she said was, "You're making a mistake. He's my grandson. That child doesn't belong to her." Elena and Adrian were present at Margaret's first court hearing. Adrian finally looked his mother in the eyes and said, "You're not saving anyone. You're breaking everyone." Margaret just smiled. Even in handcuffs, she believed she was righteous. Meanwhile, Elena's PI had completed a sweep of Margaret's basement. Inside a locked trunk, they found Margaret's notebooks. They were diaries, detailing a chilling timeline. Plans drafted months before Bella's birth. Manipulation attempts targeting ultrasound technicians. Loophole tracking for daycare protocols. Sketches of forged signatures. Coded communications with Amber. Strategies for labeling Elena as an unstable mother. Everything was submitted to the court. The DA stated, "This is no longer about custody. This is premeditated psychological manipulation." The judge denied Margaret's bail. Elena didn't feel victorious. She felt validated. Her instincts had never been wrong. But the battle wasn't over. Amber Lee was still out there. And the Save Owen group was still posting. This wasn't just Margaret's obsession anymore. It was an ideology. That night, Elena held Bella close. She whispered, "We pulled you out of her world, but her world is still out there." Elena now carried a new responsibility, not just to protect her daughter, but to expose the twisted belief system that Margaret had weaponized in the name of family. Just days after Margaret's arrest, Elena received a subpoena in the mail. Margaret's legal team was petitioning the court to make Elena's mental health records admissible. Their argument? Elena's long-standing postpartum instability contributed to miscommunication and misperception regarding Margaret's actions. Elena's hands trembled. This wasn't just a legal tactic. It was character assassination. But then she remembered the trunk. Margaret's diaries. The private investigator had already scanned every page. Margaret's words, written in her own warped handwriting, like a general chronicling a war plan. One entry described Bella as a reversible mistake. Another detailed, "Amber will approach daycare Tuesday. Owen's pickup at 3:15. Elena is usually late. Child won't resist. Reintroduce identity gradually over 3 weeks. Use blue space." Blue space, the same blue nursery. The one Margaret still believed was holy ground. Her reclamation zone. Elena sat in the courtroom as the DA submitted the journals into evidence. A silence fell over the room like a slow collapse of air. The judge read aloud from one page. "If Adrian won't help, then I must do what mothers do. Protect the soul of the child, even if it means protecting it from its own birth." Margaret's defense team went quiet. The very pages they'd hoped would paint her as a misunderstood grandmother had become a confession. Elena felt a strange kind of peace. Margaret had trapped herself with her own hand. But it wasn't over. One night, Elena sat on the porch. Bella was asleep inside. Adrian was washing dishes. Her phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number. Not everyone in the group agrees with how she went down. Don't think it's over. She blocked the number. Adrian stepped outside. Everything okay? Elena just said, leftovers. The next morning, the DA's office called. We traced a few names from the Save Owen group. One of them, a minor, had handwritten letters from Margaret in her school locker. Elena asked, letters? Yes, detailed instructions. Margaret was building a network. Amber wasn't the only one. Elena understood. Margaret didn't need to walk free. She had already planted her ideology in others. The PI later showed Elena a final entry from Margaret's diary. A sentence was underlined. If I can't hold him, I'll build a world that does. And below it, one day Elena will wake up and realize she was the imposter. Not me. Elena was back in court, this time for the kidnapping conspiracy hearing. Margaret appeared via video. No remorse, no shame, still clutching her righteousness like a relic. The DA read directly from the journal. Train Amber to say, Grandma sent me. Teach Bella her new name slowly. Never let Elena near during reorientation phase. Each word dropped like a pin in a hollow room. Elena saw the jury. Eyes were wide, some misted. A woman whispered, that's not delusion. That's design. The judge turned to Margaret. Do you have anything to say about these writings? Margaret smiled. I tried to save a soul. The judge replied, you tried to steal an identity. You constructed a kidnapping plan under the mask of motherhood. The jury deliberated briefly. Unanimous. Margaret was found guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to kidnap a minor, violation of a restraining order, psychological endangerment, attempted falsification of legal identity. The judge concluded, this isn't a case of mental illness alone. This is a weaponized belief system, a calculated attempt to overwrite reality. Outside the courthouse, the media waited. Cameras, reporters, microphones in her face. One asked, how do you feel now? Elena answered simply, I didn't win. My daughter did. But what haunted Elena most wasn't the courtroom. It was a single diary page, the one the PI read aloud before closing the file. Even if I die, someone will remember Owen. And one day, he'll come looking for his real name. Elena burned that page, but the words stayed, etched in memory, carved in vigilance. She knew now Margaret had lost, but the roots she planted still lived in the soil, and Elena's next war would be to dig every last one of them out. Margaret was sentenced to 8 years in prison, the first 4 without the possibility of parole. Conditional release only allowed after comprehensive psychiatric evaluation. The court also issued a lifetime ban, forbidding her from contacting any child welfare agency, participating in digital forums related to parenting, or engaging with any family intervention groups. But what Elena remembered most wasn't the length of the sentence. It was what the judge said. You didn't just manipulate a family. You tried to erase a child's identity and replace it with your fantasy. That is not protection. That is ideological violence. Elena had walked out of the courtroom, but she'd stepped into a new kind of reality, a world where Margaret no longer existed physically, but her shadows still stretched far and wide. Even from prison, a new version of the Save Owen group emerged. This time it was called Justice for Grandma M. It had some of the same old members, and new ones from Margaret's church circles. One day, the daycare called Elena. Someone phoned claiming to be a state evaluator, asked if Bella was still being raised under unconventional ideologies. Elena hung up. This isn't over, she said to herself. The private investigator advised her, you don't fight belief with facts, you fight it with isolation. Cut every channel she ever touched, every sympathizer. Elena moved again, this time to a gated community with private security and visitor logs. She changed Bella's daycare, now a confidential, invitation-only preschool. Adrian stopped mentioning Margaret's name altogether. He told his therapist, "Maybe I never really knew my mother at all." Elena decorated a new blue room for Bella. But this time, the walls were soft sky blue, painted with gentle white clouds. No nameplates, no roles assigned, no prophecy hanging over her daughter's crib. Just one quote, framed on the wall. "You are enough. Always." Elena knew Margaret had tried to poison the ground, had tried to convince the world that children are born with blueprints etched by someone else's nostalgia. But Elena whispered the truth every night as Bella fell asleep. "You're not a blueprint. You're a full story, and you will write it yourself." The emotional wounds ran deeper than they looked. One evening, Elena sat on the porch, the same porch where Margaret's planted book had once appeared. Adrian sat beside her, handing her a mug of chamomile tea. Elena asked, "Do you think she'll change?" 8 years. Psychiatric help? Adrian replied quietly, "Some people don't come back, because they never really left their world." Then she asked, "And what about Bella? What if one day she finds that group online and sees that people once believed she was a lie?" Elena took a long breath. "I'll sit with her," she said. "I'll tell her the whole story, and I'll say, 'You were never the lie. Their belief was.'" Time passed. Bella turned 5. She became confident, curious, expressive. The same child once called confused by Margaret's mission was now Elena's greatest truth. At her preschool's family day, Bella drew a picture. 3 people, Adrian, Elena, and herself. Above them, a rainbow. Below it, she'd written, "My family loves who I am." Tears welled in Elena's eyes, not from pain, but from validation. But even the final chapter wasn't easy. One afternoon, the doorbell rang. A woman stood at the door, clipboard in hand, formal posture. She said, "I'm here for a wellness survey. State Child Services." Elena looked at her, calmly asked, "Do you have a badge?" The woman hesitated. I left it in the car." Elena closed the door without panic, then picked up her phone, calling the police, the PI, and the preschool, all at once, because she understood now. Margaret was in prison, but ideologies don't serve time. Final shot, Elena and Adrian sitting quietly on the porch. Inside, Bella is drawing. This time, a white house, a blue sky, and a little girl surrounded by books. Elena says, "Maybe we'll never have full peace." Adrian smiles. "But we found clarity, and that's enough." Elena laughs, not from exhaustion, from fulfillment. The story isn't over. But now, she's holding the pen. Margaret's control is over. And Bella's story, it finally belongs to her. So, friends, if you liked the video, then please like the video and also subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comment how you liked the story.